April 7th, 1945. Tokyo Bay, Empire of Japan. As dawn breaks over the Japanese home islands, 91 North American P-51D Mustangs from the 15th and 21st Fighter Groups near their rendezvous point. Major James B. Tapp, seated in his Mustang, tightens his grip on the control stick. His aircraft is armed with 6 wing-mounted 0.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, loaded with armor-piercing incendiary rounds. The early model P-51Ds carry 500 rounds for each inboard gun and 270 rounds for the center and outboard positions, totaling 2,880 rounds. Later models would reduce this to 400 rounds for each inboard gun, making the new total 1,880 rounds. Below him, Mount Fuji rises majestically against the clear morning sky. Its snow-capped peak serves as a navigation point for the pilots during their mission. The sun casts long shadows across the Japanese countryside, revealing a patchwork of rice fields, villages, and military installations that have never encountered American fighters before. This mission is groundbreaking. They are to escort B-29 superfortresses deep into Japan from a base 750 miles away. Just 2 years earlier, military planners had deemed this distance impossible for single-engine fighters. At 0700 hours, over 100 Japanese interceptors converge on the American formation. Through the morning haze, a sight emerges that shocks Japanese pilots to their core. Single-engine American fighters flying over Tokyo. Their commanders had assured them this was unthinkable. The psychological impact is immediate and overwhelming. These are not carrier-based Navy fighters with limited range. They are land-based Army Air Force fighters that have somehow traversed 750 miles of open ocean to reach the imperial capital. Leading the Japanese defense are pilots in Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate, known as the Frank, Japan's fastest and most advanced fighter. They are joined by older aircraft like Ki-43 Hayabusas, Ki-44 Shoki, Ki-61 Heian, and Navia 6M0 and N1K2J Shidans. The Ki-84 can outclimb and outmaneuver both the P-51 and the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt at certain altitudes and speeds. What unfolds next will highlight the significant technological differences in air warfare between the two nations, and show why American industrial strength produced what many pilots would call the ideal long-range fighter. The North American P-51D Mustang had arrived in the Pacific Theater with a reputation already built in the skies. Over Europe, the P-51 Mustang had decisively weakened the Luftwaffe and made daytime bombing of Germany a reality. Originally designed for export to Britain, the British modified the models to incorporate Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, turning them into America's most effective fighter planes during the war. The shift from the early Allison-powered variants to the Merlin-enhanced version was a remarkable success in international collaboration, combining American design ingenuity with British engineering prowess. The result of pairing the legendary Merlin engine with the P-51 Mustang was the P-51D. This aircraft provided the United States Army Air Forces a high-performance, high-altitude, long-range fighter capable of escorting heavy bombers all the way to Berlin and back. Astonishingly, it could also travel from Iwama to Tokyo and back. The Packard 5th 1650 engine, a licensed version of the Rolls-Royce Merlin 66, produced 1,695 horsepower at takeoff with water injection. In emergency war power settings, it could reach 1,720 horsepower. This two-stage, two-speed supercharged engine maintained outstanding performance at high altitudes, where Japanese engines struggled due to their single-stage superchargers' inability to compress the thin air. The P-51D achieved a top speed of around 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet and could operate at a ceiling of nearly 42,000 feet. It was armed with 6 0.50-inch M2 Browning machine guns mounted on its wings. The firepower was formidable and meticulously calculated. With 6 M2 Browning machine guns firing at 800 rounds per minute, the P-51D could unleash 4,800 rounds of concentrated firepower each minute, translating to about 80 rounds every second. Each armor-piercing incendiary round weighed 46 grams and traveled at 2,900 feet per second, delivering powerful kinetic energy upon impact. These rounds could pierce aircraft armor, ignite fuel tanks, and destroy engines with just a few accurate hits. By the end of 1944, 14 of the 15 fighter squadrons in the United States 8th Air Force in Europe were using Mustangs. This reflected the aircraft's unmatched superiority over all other fighters available. The massive production and deployment showcased American industrial capabilities at their peak, with assembly lines operating around the clock. North American Aviation's factories in Inglewood, California, and Dallas, Texas, were churning out P-51s at astonishing rates. At the height of production, a new Mustang came off the assembly line regularly. By the end of the war, 15,586 P-51 aircraft had been built, with 8,156 being the D model. This alone surpassed Japan's entire production of all fighter types in the last 2 years of the conflict. The Mustang's impressive range was revolutionary for fighter operations. With dual 110-gallon drop tanks, these aircraft routinely flew round trips of 1,500 statute miles. In some instances, pilots pushed the distance to 1,600 miles. This distance is similar to flying from Los Angeles to Little Rock, Arkansas, entirely over water in a single-engine plane, with no alternate landing sites except the ocean. The secret to this remarkable capability lay in the Merlin engine's fuel efficiency, which used only 65 gallons during economical cruising. Combined with the P-51's laminar flow wing design, which reduced drag by 35% compared to conventional airfoils, the performance was outstanding. The design, created by North American's aerodynamicist Edgar Schmood, allowed smooth airflow over a larger portion of the wing surface. This helped delay the shift to turbulent flow and significantly cut down on parasitic drag. In stark contrast, the Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate entered service with the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service in June 1944. It arrived too late and in too few numbers to change the war's outcome. Known as Gale and designated by the Allies as Frank, this aircraft was Japan's last attempt to compete with American technological advancements. The Ki-84 is often seen as the best Japanese fighter to see widespread use during the conflict, although large numbers is relative. What Japan regarded as mass production, America would consider more like prototype runs. The Ki-84 offered high speed and excellent maneuverability. It was armed with up to two 30mm Ho 155 cannons and two 20mm Ho 5 cannons, providing strong firepower. However, the reality was more complicated. The 30mm cannons could hold only 50 rounds each, while the 20mm cannons carried just 150 rounds each. This totaled only 400 rounds versus the Mustang's 880 to 1,280 rounds. On paper, the Ki-84 seemed competitive, even superior in some areas. It was powered by the Nakajima Ha-45, a complex 18-cylinder radial engine. The aircraft featured fuel injection and a single-stage 2-speed supercharger, enhanced by water methanol injection. This setup gave the Nakajima Ki-84 a rated output of 2,000 horsepower at takeoff. Early tests showed promise, with prototypes achieving speeds of 387 miles per hour in level flight. Later, there were claims of reaching up to 427 miles per hour under optimal conditions, using high-octane fuel and perfect engine tuning. However, the realities of late-war Japanese production painted a starkly different picture. Quality was declining, improvisation was desperate, and systemic failures were rampant. Pilots and crews had to be cautious with the aircraft's Nakajima Hummer engine, which required high maintenance, and the landing gear, which was prone to buckling at critical moments. Though the Hummer engine was theoretically powerful and advanced, it faced chronic reliability issues that worsened as quality control fell apart. The engine needed precise tolerances that Japanese factories could no longer provide under constant bombardment and with a shortage of quality steel and aluminum. Late-war Japanese steel suffered from poor heat treatment and impurities, making proper hardening impossible. Consequently, many Hayates experienced strut collapses on landing. These incidents resulted in the loss of aircraft that Japan could not afford to lose, and the deaths of pilots who had undergone extensive training. The inconsistencies in production quality reflected Japan's broader industrial crisis, a nation that had staked everything on a quick victory and faced defeat. While American factories maintained high-quality standards and even improved as production methods advanced, Japanese manufacturing declined sharply. Pilots often did not know how an individual aircraft would perform. They couldn't be sure if the brakes would function, if the engine would hold up under power, or if they could climb high enough to intercept the B-29 superfortresses flying at 30,000 feet. By 1945, Japan had produced only 3,514 Ki-84s in total. Many of these were grounded due to a lack of spare parts, fuel, or qualified pilots. Of those still operational, around half could be considered combat-ready at any given moment. The fuel situation underscored the strategic catastrophe facing Japan, which had entered the war partly to secure oil resources. Pilots used 100-octane aviation gasoline transported from refineries in Texas and California. This fuel was specially made for high-performance engines. Meanwhile, Japanese pilots had to rely on whatever fuel could be produced domestically or synthesized from coal. By late in the war, Japanese aviation fuel often measured at 87 octane or even lower, sometimes as low as 80 octane. This reduced engine power and led to pre-ignition, damaging cylinders, pistons, and valves. Some desperate units tried to mix their fuel with pine root oil extracted from pine stumps, alcohol made from sweet potatoes, and even byproducts from sake production. This only worsened engine performance and reliability. Pilots reported engines that struggled to start, ran poorly at all power levels, and often failed dramatically during flight. On that first mission on April 7th, the Mustangs joined up with their charges. There were 103 Boeing B-29 superfortresses from the 73rd Bomb Wing. Each bomber was loaded with tons of incendiary bombs intended for Japanese industrial sites. Captain Art Bridge from the 45th Fighter Squadron remembered, "It was a real spectacle. The B-29s were completing their assembly in a grand circle as we arrived. The sun reflected off their aluminum skin, and they looked like a school of giant silver fish swimming through the sky." This meeting showcased a remarkable achievement in navigation and planning, made possible by American technological advantages. The P-51 Mustangs had flown 750 miles over open ocean, primarily using dead reckoning and a basic radio compass for navigation. They timed their arrival to synchronize with the bomber's schedule within just minutes. They had gradually climbed from sea level to 25,000 feet. As they ascended, their engines automatically adjusted the fuel mixture, and their superchargers shifted smoothly from low to high gear to maintain power. Once they crossed the coast of Honshu, the P-51 pilots dropped their 110-gallon auxiliary wing tanks as they spotted the first approaches from over 100 Japanese interceptors taking off from various airfields around Tokyo. The silver drop tanks fell to the earth, sparkling in the morning sunlight. Some exploded upon impact, while others bounced across rice paddies. The Japanese pilots, flying a mixed group of Ki-84s, K-43s, K-44s, K-61s, and naval fighters including Zeros and the new N-1K2J Shindenkai, faced their first shock. These were not carrier-based fighters with limited range. Fighters that had somehow made their way back to Japan from bases that seemed impossibly far away were a shocking sight. Flight Sergeant Totanemizu, flying a Ki-84 with the 56 Senti, later remembered his disbelief vividly. When we were scrambled, we were informed that enemy fighters were approaching Tokyo. We initially thought it was a mistake. Maybe they meant enemy bombers. But when I saw the Mustangs in the sky, I felt like I was dreaming. It was unbelievable. Our commanders had assured us that no American fighter could reach Japan from their island bases. Yet here they were, dozens of them, flying as if they owned our airspace. In that moment, I realized the war was truly lost. Major James B. Tapp, who would later become an ace with 8 confirmed victories, was among the first Mustang pilots to engage a formation of Japanese fighters. His combat report, written just hours after the mission, described the encounter with precision. The enemy came at us in the classic 3-plane shot formation, but their coordination was lacking. The flight leader would initiate an attack, yet his wingmen often hesitated. They seemed uncertain, perhaps short on fuel or ammunition, or maybe just inexperienced. We dove through them with a speed advantage of 100 miles per hour, fired quick bursts, and climbed back up before they could react. This breakdown in Japanese tactical coordination highlighted a dire situation in pilot training that had reached catastrophic levels. By 1945, most skilled Japanese pilots were dead, having been killed over the Solomons, New Guinea, the Philippines, or in the Marianas Turkey Shoot. New replacements received as little as 50 hours of flight training before being sent into combat, compared to the 600 hours that American pilots received before deployment. When the smoke cleared and the Mustangs returned to their base at Iwima, the Sunsetters of the 7th Fighter Command were credited with 26 Japanese aircraft destroyed, 1 probably destroyed, and 5 damaged, at the cost of 2 P-51s and 1 pilot. The 13-to-1 kill ratio in this first mission would only improve as American pilots gained more experience over Japan, while the quality of Japanese pilots continued to decline. In just a few weeks, kill ratios of 20-to-1 or even 30-to-1 became common, reflecting not only American superiority, but also Japanese desperation. The performance gap between the aircraft became strikingly evident during combat, particularly in the vertical aspects, where air combat increasingly took place. Superiority was most apparent above 20,000 feet, the altitude where most interceptions occurred. At these heights, the Merlin engine's 2-stage supercharger maintained performance similar to sea level, while Japanese engines struggled. The first stage compressed the thin air, cooled it through an intercooler, and then sent it to a second stage for further compression. This allowed for dense, oxygen-rich air to reach the cylinders. In contrast, the Ki-84 used a single-stage supercharger without an intercooler or a second stage. This limitation caused its power to drop significantly above 20,000 feet, reducing its speed advantage and climb rate right where interceptions were most common. At 30,000 feet, the Ki-84 had difficulty maintaining 350 miles per hour, but the P-51D could still reach 420 miles per hour. Lieutenant Jerry Yellin of the 78th Fighter Squadron, who would complete the last combat mission of the war on August 14, 1945, described a typical engagement vividly. He recalled spotting the enemy climbing to meet them, leaving dark exhaust trails as they pushed their throttles to the limit. However, by 25,000 feet, the Japanese fighters struggled like fish out of water. Their engines were smoking, likely running rich because their superchargers could not supply enough air. The Americans dove through their formation with guns blazing, the tracers appearing like laser beams. The Japanese simply could not match their speed during the dive or the subsequent climb. The Merlin engine would sing as they pulled up, the G-forces pressing them into their seats, while Japanese engines coughed and sputtered, struggling to maintain power. The P-51D could dive close to 500 miles per hour while staying in control, thanks to its laminar flow wings, which worked well even in transonic speeds. On the other hand, Japanese fighters often faced control problems or structural failures when diving over 400 miles per hour. Their control surfaces would malfunction, or their wings would tear off. The difference in pilot quality was devastating and worsened over time. American pilots arriving at Iwo Jima typically had between 400 and 600 hours of flight experience, with over 100 hours in their specific aircraft. They had undergone extensive gunnery practice and combat training with experienced instructors, flying captured enemy aircraft or realistic simulations. They had practiced formation flying to the point where it was second nature, learned instrument navigation in all weather, practiced deflection shooting at towed targets, and developed combat tactics from 3 years of air warfare experience. In 1945, Japanese pilots typically had fewer than 100 flight hours. Some had as few as 30 hours. They received little gunnery practice due to ammunition shortages, and they lacked instrument training. Combat tactics were learned from manuals instead of experienced instructors who were either deceased or engaged in their own combat missions. The navigation difficulties quickly distinguished those who could survive from those who could not. Pilots flew single-engine fighters on round trips of 1,500 meters over a vast ocean with few navigation aids. Success required both confidence and trust in their aircraft and support systems. American pilots benefited from detailed weather briefings created from submarine weather reports and reconnaissance flights. They had access to accurate maps that were regularly updated with information from photo reconnaissance. Their instruments were manufactured to high standards. Rescue submarines were positioned along their routes. These submarines saved dozens of downed airmen, and if they faced emergency landings, Dumbo PBY Catalina flying boats were ready to assist. In contrast, Japanese pilots often flew with outdated maps that did not reflect recent bomb damage. Their compasses were unreliable, and they had no hope of rescue if they went down over water. Many life rafts leaked, and their emergency rations were typically consumed during food shortages on land. The magnetic variation between Iwima and Tokyo in 1945 was 3 degrees west. Since Tokyo was located between the 139th and 140th meridians, and Iwima was between the 141st and 142nd, navigation could be reduced to simple compass headings for the return flight. This fortunate geographical detail saved many American lives. When weather conditions worsened, or pilots became disoriented during combat, their compasses could spin uncontrollably. A pilot could just fly south-southeast, knowing he would eventually spot Mount Suribachi rising from the ocean, as long as he had enough fuel. The logistics supporting the two forces exposed the reality of the Pacific Air War, a struggle between American abundance and Japanese scarcity. Every mission from Iwima involved nearly 100 Mustangs that consumed 57,000 gallons of high-octane fuel and carried 230,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, along with bombs and rockets for ground attacks. This was just one day of operations from one base. 3 fighter groups operated from Iwima alone. Supporting them was a supply chain that reached back to factories in Detroit, refineries in Texas, and ammunition plants in Missouri. Liberty ships were produced at a rate of 3 per day, along with C-54 Sky transport aircraft that regularly flew cargo routes across the Pacific. Daily, ships arrived at Iwima to unload fuel, ammunition, spare parts, food, mail, and countless other necessities to keep a modern air force running. In stark contrast, Japanese logistics had fallen into chaos and desperation. Aviation fuel was so limited that training flights were canceled. This left new pilots entering combat without recent flying experience. Ammunition was rationed, even for combat missions. Pilots were instructed to save their rounds for only the most certain shots. The Japanese Navy and Army Air Forces, which had never coordinated well even in the best times, now competed for dwindling resources like starving dogs fighting over scraps. Aircraft were stripped for spare parts until they resembled nothing more than aluminum skeletons. Entire fighter groups were grounded due to a lack of tires, spark plugs, or hydraulic fluid. Some units tried to make their own spare parts in makeshift workshops, but the results were predictably poor. The gap in technological sophistication was evident in all aspects of operations, not just in the aircraft. American pilots wore G-suits that prevented blackouts during tight maneuvers by helping blood flow back to the brain. They used standardized oxygen systems that worked reliably above 30,000 feet with automatic flow regulation. Communication was done through VHF radios that provided clear reception and multiple channels. Their parachutes were regularly inspected and repacked. Their life rafts were equipped with working radios and fresh supplies, while their survival kits included everything from morphine to fishing gear. In contrast, Japanese pilots often flew without functioning radios. Their vacuum tube radios wasted valuable battery power and seldom worked properly. They relied on unreliable oxygen systems that frequently failed above 20,000 feet, leading to hypoxia and disorientation. They also lacked G-suits, which limited their ability to maneuver aggressively like the Americans without risking blackouts or eye injuries. On June 1st, 1945, a day known as Black Friday by the Mustang men, it was the weather, not enemy action, that posed the greatest threat. This situation highlighted that even American technology had its limits. Around 150 Mustangs heading to Osaka encountered a severe weather front that was not predicted. In just a few minutes, 27 aircraft were lost, with 24 of those due to the weather. Pilots became disoriented in towering clouds, collided with each other, or ran out of fuel while trying to find clear skies. This incident demonstrated that even with their advanced technology, American missions over long distances pushed both pilots and their planes to the edge. The weather front reached from sea level to 40,000 feet, bringing violent turbulence, icing, and zero visibility. Pilots reported seeing St. Elmo's fire on their wings, compasses spinning wildly, and artificial horizons flipping as their gyroscopes struggled to keep up with the chaotic movement. The effect on Japanese morale was devastating and could not be undone. Captain Yoshio Yoshida, an important pilot in the 47th Senti who survived the war, noted in his diary, "The presence of American fighters over Tokyo has destroyed our confidence completely. We were told the B-29 bombers would be defenseless without escorts, that their fighters could never reach this far. Now we see Mustangs over the palace, attacking our airfields in broad daylight, shooting down our best pilots as if they were novices. How can we protect the Emperor when enemy fighters patrol freely over our sacred land?" The image of those Mustangs, with their invasion stripes and overwhelming numbers, reveals a truth our leaders refuse to acknowledge. The war is lost, and we are merely waiting to perish. Major Tapp described the very long-range missions as a true test of flying skill during a post-war interview. Engaging Japanese fighter pilots was exciting, but traveling from one point to another was the real challenge. The ocean below felt infinite, featureless, and hypnotic. You would constantly check your compass, questioning if it was accurate, if you had somehow lost your way. The physical and mental pressure was immense and built up over time. Pilots remained strapped in their cockpits for 8 hours or longer, unable to stand, stretch, or relieve themselves, except through a tube that frequently froze at high altitudes. They endured cramping legs that felt like they were being pierced with needles, numb behinds that made them doubt they would ever walk again, and the ongoing fear of flying a single-engine aircraft over vast empty ocean, where a single mechanical failure could mean certain death. The Mustang's cockpit design was improved over 3 years of combat experience and countless pilot reports. It outperformed Japanese designs in every way. The P-51D had a bubble canopy that allowed for full visibility. Pilots could easily look behind them by turning their heads, which was crucial in combat situations. The seat adjusted to fit pilots of various heights. The rudder pedals were movable to suit different leg lengths, and controls were placed to minimize fatigue during long flights. The instrument panel was clearly arranged, with vital instruments like airspeed, altitude, and engine gauges positioned right in front of the pilot. The Ki-84 cockpit, while better than older Japanese fighters like the Zero, still faced significant visibility issues. Structural elements in the fuel tank behind the pilot obstructed the view to the rear. Additionally, the controls were awkwardly placed, forcing pilots to remove their hands from the stick during critical moments. Instruments were often hard to read in combat, especially during high G-force maneuvers or when engine vibrations caused blurring. Armament differences played a crucial role in determining combat outcomes, deciding who survived in the fast-paced encounters of air combat. The P-51D featured 650 caliber machine guns. While it might seem less impressive than the Ki-84's combination of cannons and machine guns, it had key advantages proven by combat experience. The American guns boasted incredible reliability, with stoppage rates below 1% when properly maintained, which was ensured by dedicated armament specialists. The P-51D carried significantly more ammunition, 1,880 rounds compared to the Ki-84's total of 400 rounds for both cannons and machine guns. This allowed American pilots to take more range shots, engage multiple targets, and not worry about running out of ammunition after just a few seconds of firing. American pilots had a strong understanding of the ballistics of 50 caliber rounds, enabling them to reliably hit targets at 400 yards. In contrast, Japanese pilots struggled with their mixed cannon and machine gun armament. They faced challenges with convergence zones and differing ballistic trajectories, making hitting targets at a distance extremely difficult. The disparity in training among gunners was even clearer. Pilots had fired thousands of rounds during their training. They learned how to lead their targets, estimate distances, and fire in short bursts to prevent overheating their weapons. They practiced with towed sleeves, camera guns, and engaged in mock dogfights until deflection shooting became second nature. In 1945, Japanese pilots were fortunate to fire even 100 rounds in training, if that. The ammunition was too valuable to waste on training. It was crucial for combat. Many pilots entered their first battle having never even fired their guns, trying to learn how to shoot while facing real threats. The last aerial engagement of the Sunsetter took place near Tokyo on August 10, 1945. The 15th and 56th Fighter Groups reported 7 kills in this air battle, one of the final confrontations of World War II. By then, Japanese resistance had become nearly symbolic, far removed from the powerful force that had previously swept across the Pacific. Fuel shortages had grounded most Japanese fighters as their fuel was redirected to kamikaze missions. Those aircraft that did fly were often manned by teenagers with little training. These were boys who had only recently been in high school. In total, the Mustangs of the 8th Warfel Operations Group were credited with shooting down 206 Japanese airplanes between April and August 1945. This accounted for 75% of the P-51 victories in the Pacific. The actual tally was likely higher, as many Japanese planes downed over Japan were never confirmed, with wreckage recovered lost in forests or urban settings. The strategic impact of these victories reached far beyond the air. The presence of P-51s over Japan allowed B-29 bombers to conduct daylight raids with greater accuracy, systematically dismantling Japan's industrial base. Japanese industrial production, already weakened from material shortages and B-29 strikes, came to a complete standstill under precise daytime bombing. The psychological toll was equally severe. Japanese civilians witnessed American fighters attacking airfields in broad daylight, shooting at trains, and targeting shipping in Tokyo Bay. This made it clear that Japan had lost control of its airspace. The myth of the divine wind, which was supposed to protect Japan, was shattered when American fighters flew over the Imperial Palace itself. Lieutenant Colonel John R. Morgan of the 457th Fighter Squadron carried out several reconnaissance missions over Japan in a specially modified P-51D with cameras instead of guns. His findings highlighted the extent of the collapse of Japanese aviation. We flew over airfields that our intelligence indicated held hundreds of planes. In reality, we often found only a few dozen that were operational. Many were nothing more than wrecks. Some planes were missing engines or propellers, while others were just empty shells stripped for parts. They would move a plane named Rex around to create the illusion of having more flyable aircraft for our photo interpreters. However, we could easily identify a real plane from a Hulk. Some airfields even had fake wooden planes, complete with painted markings, to mislead us and divert our attacks from actual planes hidden under camouflage or in revetments. The numbers were undeniable and painted a clear picture of the war. The United States produced 15,586 P-51s of all types during the conflict. That was more than Japan's total production of all aircraft types in 1944 and 1945 combined. Japan managed about 3,500 Ki-84s, but many were destroyed by B-29 raids and carrier strikes, lost in training accidents, or grounded due to a lack of parts. American production lines were thriving just as Japanese production began to fall apart. At its peak, North American aviation produced 20 P-51s each day. That exceeded Japan's monthly production of Ki-84s. Each American aircraft was largely identical with interchangeable parts. In contrast, Japanese aircraft varied greatly in quality and performance, even within the same production run. Training also highlighted the overwhelming advantage held by the United States. By 1945, the United States was training 30,000 pilots each year. Each pilot received 200 to 300 hours of flight instruction, followed by advanced fighter training, and then an additional 100 hours of combat training. Japan's pilot training program was in shambles. New pilots received only about 50 hours of training, often much less, before being sent to operational units. The math of attrition was unyielding. America could replace its losses while maintaining quality, but Japan could not keep up, even with lowered standards. For every pilot Japan trained, America trained 10, and the American pilots were much better equipped. Fuel consumption displayed the strategic conclusion in stark terms. Each P-51 mission from Iwama used around 600 gallons of 100-octane fuel per aircraft, which included internal fuel and drop tanks. With 100 aircraft on each mission and operations happening daily, that totaled 60,000 gallons each day for just one fighter group. American tankers provided the necessary supply. Millions of gallons of fuel flowed each month to bases in the Pacific. It was a constant stream of fuel crossing the ocean. Meanwhile, Japan tried to create aviation fuel from pine roots. It took 200 pine stumps to make just 1 gallon of barely usable fuel. They even converted training aircraft into kamikaze weapons because they did not have enough fuel for regular operations. By August 1945, Japan had less than 200,000 gallons of aviation fuel left in the home islands. That was only enough for perhaps one major operation. The technological advancement, represented by the P-51D, went beyond just impressive performance numbers. It symbolized a whole philosophy of warfare. This aircraft showcased American industrial principles such as mass production with quality control, standardization across different manufacturers, and ongoing improvement based on feedback from combat. Each P-51D that came off the assembly line was essentially the same. They had interchangeable parts and predictable performance. A pilot could enter any P-51D and know exactly how it would behave, including where every switch and instrument was located. In contrast, Japanese aircraft were increasingly handmade with materials of varying quality. This resulted in significant performance differences, even among planes produced in the same batch. One aircraft might reach 400 miles per hour, while another from the same factory could struggle to exceed 350 miles per hour due to inconsistencies in manufacturing. Brigadier General Ernest M. Moore, who commanded the 7th Fighter Command, later remarked that there was no doubt the P-51 was the best propeller-driven fighter of World War II. He stated it was the top air fighter for escort missions and on par with the P-47 as an attacker against ground targets. This evaluation reflected not just the aircraft's performance, but also its reliability, ease of maintenance, and adaptability to the rigorous demands of very long-range operations. The P-51 could be refueled and rearmed in just 30 minutes. It could fly twice a day if necessary and could operate from rough coral runways that could ruin more delicate aircraft. The maintenance statistics provided further evidence of American superiority. P-51Ds at Iwama maintained an operational rate above 80%, even under harsh conditions. Volcanic dust infiltrated everything, salt air corroded aluminum, and limited facilities meant most maintenance was done outdoors. Ground crews could change engines in just 4 hours using mobile cranes and standardized procedures. Battle damage that could keep a Japanese fighter grounded for weeks could be fixed overnight, with prefabricated parts flown in from the United States. The key aircraft had serviceability rates below 40% and sometimes as low as 20%, even when fuel and ammunition were available. The complex Humar engine required specialized tools that were often unavailable. Trained technicians were mostly dead or drafted into combat units. Additionally, spare parts had to be hand-fitted due to poor manufacturing tolerances. Weather reconnaissance provided another major advantage that saved countless American lives. Dedicated B-29 bombers flew weather reconnaissance missions hours before fighter operations. They reported on cloud conditions, wind speeds, and frontal systems. These weather aircraft supplied crucial meteorological data that helped plan routes around severe weather. However, as Black Friday demonstrated, weather could still catch even the best prepared missions off guard. Japanese forces lacking such capabilities often flew into dangerous weather that devastated entire formations. The American ability to predict and avoid weather fronts greatly reduced operational losses. In contrast, Japanese units suffered catastrophic weather-related losses that surpassed combat casualties. The communication infrastructure supporting American operations was revolutionary for its time. High-frequency radio beacons transmitted from submarines and island bases. Submarine-based coordination for rescue missions could direct search aircraft to downed pilots. Real-time weather updates created a safety network that gave pilots the confidence to push the extreme range capabilities of their aircraft. The psychological assurance that someone would come looking for you if you went down was invaluable. Japanese pilots often flew without working radios and without hope of rescue if they were forced down. They faced each mission with a grim acceptance of probable death. Their farewell ceremonies before missions were sincere. They expected never to return. Captain Harry Krim Jr. of the 531st Fighter Squadron, who became an ace over Japan with 7 victories, recognized the harsh reality. He noted, "We owned the sky over Japan. We could go where we wanted, when we wanted. The Japanese knew it. We knew it. And most importantly, Japanese civilians knew it." Every P-51 over Tokyo was a clear indication that Japan had lost the war. The fight for air superiority was over. The Americans already had it. We were showcasing our superiority, proving to them that any resistance was hopeless. The long-range missions shifted the strategic balance in the Pacific. Japan's earlier calculations were rendered useless. The home islands could no longer depend on distance for protection. For centuries, they relied on this geographical barrier. Now, their industrial heartland, which had managed to stay relatively safe for 3 years of conflict, was vulnerable to daily assaults. The sight of American fighters over Tokyo crushed the last remnants of Japan's belief in its defensive capabilities. It dismantled the myth of the divine wind and confirmed that defeat was not only possible, but unavoidable. The human toll illustrated the stark technological gap in harsh numbers. Between July 1st and August 15th, 1945, a total of 85 American fighter pilots lost their lives on very long-range missions. However, only a few, about 5 or 6, were lost in direct air-to-air combat. Most of the losses were due to operational issues like weather, mechanical failures, navigation mistakes, or sheer exhaustion leading to critical errors. During the same period, Japanese pilot losses totaled in the hundreds, possibly exceeding 1,000, as entire squadrons were wiped out in futile efforts to intercept American forces. The 47th Squadron, which had begun April with 40 operational pilots, was left with just 3 by August. The 244th Squadron was entirely wiped out, reformed with new pilots, and then destroyed again. The final dogfights over Japan signaled the complete disintegration of Japanese air power as a structured force. On August 14th, 1945, which was August 15th in Japan due to the time difference, Lieutenant Jerry Yellin undertook what would be the last combat mission of the war. Departing from Iwima alongside his wingman, 19-year-old Second Lieutenant Philip Schlamberg, they targeted airfields near Nagoya. This mission had been organized before news of Japan's surrender reached them, and the recall code word Utah never made it to their radios. Yellin and Schlamberg attacked their goals and then headed home, diving into a cloud formation to avoid anti-aircraft fire. When Yellin emerged from the clouds, Schlamberg was missing, shot down by ground fire. He became the last American combat casualty of World War II. Even as defeat loomed, with the war coming to an end and the Emperor's surrender announcement already recorded, Japanese anti-aircraft positions continued to fire. Desperate determination filled the air. But Japanese fighters were noticeably absent. They had mostly disappeared as a viable force. A lack of fuel, a shortage of pilots, and many being destroyed left them grounded. The facts of the air war were clear and indisputable. They were written in aluminum and blood across the skies of Japan. The P-51D Mustang, capable of reaching a top speed of 440 miles per hour, had a range of 2,000 miles with drop tanks. It was equipped with 6 reliable machine guns and nearly 2,000 rounds of ammunition, leaving the Japanese home islands defenseless against daylight air attacks. The Ki-84 Hayate, despite its potential and the bravery of its pilots, lacked the numbers, reliability, and quality needed for an effective defense. It was not a fair fight, but a foregone conclusion. The outcome was shaped as much by factories in Detroit and oil wells in Texas as by aerial battles over Tokyo. The American industrial power, showcased through the extraordinary P-51 Mustang, accomplished what naval blockades and island hopping could not. It entirely removed Japan's ability to defend its airspace. The B-29 bombers that dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki flew without fighter escorts, not due to a lack of availability, but because none were necessary. Japanese fighter opposition had been wiped out, overwhelmed by the superior American technology, training, and production. Of the 3,514 Ki-84s built, only one remains today. It can be found in the Chiron Peace Museum in Kagoshima, Japan, serving as a solitary reminder of Japan's futile attempt to match American technological prowess. In contrast, hundreds of P-51 Mustangs still exist in museums and private collections around the world. Many of them still fly at air shows today, their Merlin engines echoing the song of American industrial success more than 70 years after they first soared above Tokyo. The difference in surviving aircraft tells a significant story. American planes were built to endure, meticulously maintained, and treasured as historical artifacts. Japanese aircraft, on the other hand, were designed for immediate deployment. They were expected to be destroyed in combat and treated as disposable. The shock that Japanese pilots experienced when they faced P-51 Mustangs over Tokyo went beyond mere tactical surprise. It was the shocking realization that American industrial capability and technological progress had turned what seemed impossible into routine. Single-engine fighters executed 1,500-meter combat missions, arriving with enough fuel for 2 hours of fighting before safely returning to base. This was beyond the understanding or ability of Japan. The P-51D Mustang flying over Mount Fuji was more than just a plane. It represented American industrial strength, technological progress, and the unyielding math of total war. The message was harsh and clear. In modern industrial conflict, superior technology combined with high production leads to victory. The P-51D Mustang showcased American industry at its finest. Over 15,000 aircraft were built with consistent quality. They were flown by highly trained pilots and backed by limitless logistics, all deployed with strategic accuracy. In contrast, Japan's Ki-84 Hayate, despite its brave pilots and occasional successes, had no chance. The sight of American fighters over Tokyo was a harsh confrontation with reality. This reality culminated in atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki by B-29 bombers, which no longer required fighter protection because Japanese air power had vanished. The Mustangs accomplished their mission with ruthless effectiveness. They demonstrated that distance could not provide safety, that industrial strength outweighed the spirit of the warrior, and that technological advantage, when applied effectively, was unbeatable. The Japanese pilots who encountered them in those final months faced the hardest truth of modern warfare. Courage alone could not counter the math of industrial output, technological development, and logistical dominance. The P-51D Mustang over Tokyo signified the end of the samurai era, replaced by the age of production lines, superchargers, and long-range fighter escorts. The divine wind had been overtaken by science, the warrior spirit subdued by industrial power, and the empire of the rising sun overshadowed by aluminum wings and steel engines.